Welcome to the Believe, Be Real, Be Bold podcast for authentic dating in Denver. My name is Dave Glazer, your host and facilitator, where each week we bring expert guests to come share their knowledge, tools, and tips so that we can show up as our most authentic self. All right. Hey guys, welcome back to the Believe, Be Real, Be Bold podcast. I'm so honored to be in the home of Mr. Danny Mazur.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much for inviting me in.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I'm excited to be on the show.
I'm so pumped to have you here too. We connected through one of our former guests, Kerri-Ann Appleton, and she thought that we would actually really connect and have a great conversation over modern day life, really, is really what she thought we would get along best with. And since meeting you, it's been an absolute pleasure. We just recorded an episode on your podcast.
In this very same spot.
In this very same spot. So we're going to break in the couch. Well, tell me a little bit about how and why you got into exactly what it is that you do through the Soul Story set.
Yeah, so Soul Story started, I swear this story changes, but end of, or May of it would have been May of 2014. Our first event would have been in September. But that year, I had just moved out to Colorado from Ohio. And I remember moving out and being like, I have lived a really privileged, comfortable lifestyle. And I really need to know how to struggle. I really need to learn how to struggle before I move out here, or when I move out here. And so I got here, and crazy, within a month, I get a call from my sister that says my mom had overdosed on pills and survived, thank God. And then I had a friend that I leaned on in that moment. We were going to a party that I cried on his shoulder, and that same person developed early onset schizophrenia a couple months later. And I was working in AmeriCorps and 50-hour days, making $450 every 2 weeks on food stamps, and so lost in my own pain. I remember just I need a space to express this, because I was smoking and drinking and escaping constantly. So me and my best friend at the time and co-founder, who left shortly after the founding, Alex, we had this conversation in a living room where we just started to be honest with each other and vulnerable and express what was on our heart and our mind. And it was one of the first times in Denver that I felt liberated. And so I was like, we should start a community like this. And that was the beginning of the Soul Stories community. At the time, Storytellers. It was called Storytellers.
And did you see an immediate change in your situation, or did it take a while for things to improve after you moved here?
From what time?
Let's say you're struggling so much with your own pain and your own economic situation, and then you started becoming vulnerable with your co-founder. Did things immediately change, or did it take a while?
It took a while. It was a long process. That was probably the beginning of a transformational process that I would say the last 5 years up until early August this year. There was a long journey, and obviously the journey's still happening, but I'd say that was the August marked the end of that period of time.
So you could definitely identify a phase or a time frame in your life that's significant for you.
Yeah, a very clear one, yeah.
You and Alex founded Direction. You started Storytellers community, but then it became Soul Stories. And how has this timeline, this section of your life changed you?
Yeah, so do you want to know the process or the result?
Let's talk about both, because
Okay.
we can't talk about the result without actually going through the shit.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, so process-wise, Storytellers community starts, and I learn what it means to tell your story and be vulnerable and be honest. And I found that the greatest thing from that is that it just attracts the people that are going to support you on that journey. Like, I found storytelling is most powerful for community building. It's very powerful for healing, but I honestly think it helps you create more of an external healing community than in some ways internal. We could argue this and talk about this different ways. I could get down a rabbit hole on this. But yeah, it brought together a really strong community that I felt like I could go on the path I wanted to, and the people around me were like, they had my back, which was awesome. Mm-hmm. And then I got into therapy, and my first therapist, I would say, was emotionally abusive to me. And I had a partner in Soul Stories that I also met that carried that same quality, so it was interesting. It was interesting to have that experience, and especially with my therapist, I would go in and I would tell him, you know, things going wrong in my life, and he would like have these brilliant insights, and then I'd go back and I'd take these insights and I'd put them into action, because I'm a very like introspective, that's definitely my biggest strength. And so I would put it into action, and I'd come back and I'd be like, check this out, check what I did. And he would take everything I said and figure out how that was a negative now. So it would be like insight, progress, chop down, new insight, progress on that, chop down. And I did that for about a year, and my friends around me were like, dude, this guy's fucking your mind up. Is it okay to cuss?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, of course.
And
it's definitely contextually appropriate.
Yeah.
It sounds like he was fucking your mind.
Yeah. He really was. And so that was really challenging. And then I was going to different churches, different spiritual centers, and storytelling. Like, he convinced me that, he would tell me that I'm only doing storytellers or soul stories because I wanted to be a guru. And he would say, like, this is just for you. You're not doing it for anybody else. And so I kind of believed that about myself, and I took that to heart. And that made the Soul Stories journey more complicated, because I had this like self-hatred of myself, you know, blaming myself for things that happened with my family and whatever. And then that self-hatred was mirrored back to me. I attracted people, you know, that could bring that out in me. And then I bought into that because it made sense to me. I was already in that space. And then as I, you know, the Soul Stories community, the people like Chelsea, my roommate, some of my closest friends came from building that community. And they were really the ones to like point these things out and help me, like lift me up when I couldn't lift myself up. And then as I figured that out, you know, I met and dated a few women, and then I met a therapist this last January. And that was crazy how that came into my life too. A guy from my city year like messaged me and was just like, I hadn't talked to this guy in 4 years. I honestly struggled with him when we were in the city year. And then he texted me, he's like, hey man, I made a lot of changes in my life. I would love to reconnect. And I haven't seen him since that meeting, but he's like, I have this therapist who changed my life. I used to like really consider all these things, and now I like things that used to affect me don't affect me anymore. And I was like, and speaking of this podcast, it's just started a relationship, and a lot of my strongest issues are held in the intimate relationship sphere. And so I was like, I need somebody, because I'm going nuts and I'm driving this woman nuts.
Yeah.
And then I met my therapist, Jenny, and because of her, I would not be where I am as a leader, as a professional, as a friend, as a potential intimate partner without that. So,
what is the major difference between your former therapist and Jenny?
they're both incredibly intelligent. Jenny's method and her I would say Jenny's integrity it's for the client. Whereas I felt like my past therapist was there to appear as the insightful one, to be the one in authority, to be the one in control. And Jenny, I always felt like it was about me. It was about my healing. So I went in there like knowing she was there for me.
Good, as it should be.
Right.
Right. I can relate a lot, seeing a counselor from last January, a year ago, until now. Mm-hmm. Now we're starting to back off, and I only need to do monthly check-ins now, which is great.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Of course, we always see patterns come up in our relationships. Mm-hmm. That's why we tend to talk about what we talk about on the podcast. We're reiterating common themes and topics on the podcast regularly, so people understand that, like, A, you're not alone, and B, there's something that we can do about it. Yeah. So having somebody trusted that we can speak to with outside eyes on our lives and on our situations and on our language that we choose to talk about ourselves with, like, we primarily focus on cognitive behavior therapy. So I'm essentially changing the way that I think about my world and about myself.
Yeah.
From self-hatred to maybe self-love.
Yeah.
Can you relate to that?
Yeah, totally. The work I did with Jenny is about identifying beliefs that hold you back, and then really feeling through the emotions that are held through these beliefs, and then when you letting go and feeling through these beliefs and then turning them into new beliefs. And there's like a process that she does.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've come to understand that I was focusing too much on limiting beliefs, and then I eventually turned all those negative thoughts around the limiting beliefs, what's holding me back, into foundational beliefs.
Yeah.
Affirmations. I am strong enough to lead this community. I am smart enough to see a mission and a path and a vision for where we're going.
Yeah.
So I'm on board with that, 100%. If that's the type of person who's looking outside in on your life, that's the right place to be.
Yeah.
You've told us a little bit about the hardship that you've gone through in creating this community.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what's come out of it now, since last August, basically.
Okay, yeah. I think the biggest thing that came out of it was when I was able to move past my own pain, I then was able to see more clearly what I was creating, and that it wasn't for me, just as I found a therapist that was working more for me rather than herself. I think after moving past my pain, I was able to see more clearly how to create something that people needed. And since then, we've been able to bring social issues to the space, and before it was really heavy into vulnerable dialogue. So story sharing back and forth. It was essentially like group counseling in some way. And now we've brought it to a place where we can have like really strong dialogue about things impacting our communities, impacting ourselves. We can bring out those vulnerable stories, but support them with like actionable ideas and critical thinking, and it's just expanded so much because of that. Yeah.
And it's primarily hosted in live events, and who comes to these events?
We have different style events. So our first Sunday events is this organic build, and I would say it's primarily artists, spiritual seekers, creatives of different kinds, people looking to talk about more vulnerable emotional issues, mostly millennials, but then we have people spanning all ages, up to 70, which has been really great. And then our social issue events, like we have a seat at the table about gentrification. We have Unpacked, a creative dialogue on consent. We just did In Relationship with Our Bodies. It has been really healing. Those have been healing spaces for people impacted by those issues. So the gentrification event was extremely diverse, from people from different walks of life, professionals in the gentrification field, people who are just looking for an outlet to discuss this, and all in between so far. But probably primarily, if I were to pick an audience, it'd probably be like 25 to 34, with people coming from different areas.
And they're seeking some spirituality, connection with other people, and they're seeking a community where they can be authentic and vulnerable.
Yes, yeah, definitely that.
And where is Soul Stories heading?
Where is Soul Stories heading? Well, you were just on the podcast, so
Yeah.
we have a podcast developing, and I'm really hoping that Soul Stories becomes, I guess the vision I see is it becomes an organization where these difficult conversations, both personally and socially, can happen, and we have multitudes of teams leading different issues, different topics, and we can expand our reach, because I think I just see how important it is for people to communicate, as you were talking before, and how difficult it is in many social situations to have challenging conversations. I think even an example is like how many people I run across who are like, vulnerability, I love it, like let's do more of it. Brene Brown, she's great, or these social issues are killing us, like we need to discuss it, and how many people just say that? And I think the need I want to meet is like, okay, if we're going to say that, we need to do that. We need to actually have these conversations. So I want to be a space where, across the country, there's different pockets of communities that have the tools to have these conversations.
Mm-hmm. And then action steps after that. After the conversation's over with, here's what we're going to do about it.
Yeah. Especially with like the gentrification and the specific social issues.
Yeah. Okay. I'm getting a clearer picture of what the mission is and what somebody can experience when they come attend the events.
Yeah.
Do you have an event coming up that people would want to attend or want some information about?
Yeah. We have Liminal, a storytelling event, which is 8 storytellers on stage telling diverse stories on the topic expectations. It's entertainment based, but it's incredibly vulnerable and beautiful to watch these storytellers really dig into themselves and cross many different boundaries of topics from the lens of expectations. And then that's on April 12th at the Mercury Cafe from 7 to 9:30. And on April 26th, we have Unpacked, a creative dialogue on consent. And we have some of the top storytellers and poets in this city telling different stories on their experiences with consent. And it is diverse in age, diverse in skin color, diverse in gender.
Sure.
And that is at the Savoy at Curtis Park from 6:30 to 9.
Awesome. So when you say consent, that's sexual consent?
Sexual consent.
And I'm fascinated by modern dating, modern relationships, and those two things cannot be discussed without the discussion of consent.
100%.
So what kind of conversation may come up about consent at this event?
I think what people will be bringing up is power dynamics will be a strong one. Women finding their voice in relationship to men expecting things that men not being aware of what they're expecting and not really asking. There will be positive consent stories about like what it feels like, what it is when it goes well, what happens when there's a dynamic where people are able to ask each other what feels good. Can we do this tonight? Get really in it. It'll be across the board. We're hoping for like that gray space to like move past the victims and perpetrators, but like, somebody's gonna talk about kissing someone when it was unwanted and not reading the signs for
Sure.
it. Because I think that happens a lot more than we give credit for. Sexual assault is incredibly prevalent, and there are so many victims I send my heart out to. And then there are so many gray spaces that we haven't figured out how to talk about that with each other. And so hopefully those stories break that open for people to be able to have that discussion.
I like that you're breaking it down to the basics of just an unwanted advance like a kiss.
Yeah.
And in maybe like painting of the picture, that first time that you kiss somebody can actually be really flirty if you ask for their consent.
Yes.
You know, it can be like a joyous occasion of like, hey, can I sneak a kiss from you?
Yeah.
You know, I've actually said that on a third date. I never kiss on the first date because I want a clear head when I go home and I want to process everything that just happened. And if I wake up the next morning and I'm still thinking about how great the time I had, then there we go, we got a second date. So I waited until the third date with this particular girl that I was seeing. Before we were sitting on the couch after having drinks out, hey, can I sneak a kiss from you? And she thought it was actually like really cute, really sweet, and she, of course, her answer was yes. I mean, we'd been out 3 times, so I didn't assume consent.
Right, and that's the thing.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I'm sure that we can come up with a lot of conversation topics on just that beginning step in a relationship or beginning step in physical contact.
Yeah.
And then what else can we experience in a discussion on consent?
I think that will be. I think the other thing coming up will be like assumptions based on gender and based on race and body type, body relationship to the body is going to come up to it because you unpack one issue and like it explodes the whole thing.
Yeah. You said rabbit hole earlier.
Yeah, rabbit holes.
You can definitely layer upon layer upon layer. The conversation builds upon itself.
Totally.
So in body awareness or body connection, maybe body language is part of the conversation with consent too.
Yeah, that's
that
true.
person who went in for the unwanted kiss didn't read the signs of body language.
Yes, and I think I don't know if you heard the Aziz Ansari story, but the Aziz Ansari story seems very similar to that, where it seemed like he was just in his own ego, wanting what he wanted. This was my perspective on it, and not reading body language of his partner, and probably not caring to at the time. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole form of communication right there, is body language.
What, 90% of our communication is unspoken?
Yeah.
Like, we were discussing communication before we hit record. And communication and the way that we talk to each other is the foundation of healthy human interaction between us.
Yeah, and I think it's really challenging for people, and they don't necessarily have the correct role models and correct skills. It's such a deep skill, and I think it's one of those skills that you look at and go, of course I know how to talk to people, but yeah. It's so much deeper than that, and it's a constant practice.
And in the context of consent, no does not mean try harder.
Right. Which, I don't know if this happened to you, but as a boy growing up, it was kind of, that message was subtly sent to me.
Like the challenge.
Yes.
Yeah, of course we were ridiculed for not trying harder, or ridiculed in the locker room, etc. Like that's the stereotypical location where we're talking about conquests and advances and this and that happened, da 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 da.
Yeah.
Hyper masculine arena where we're judged for not participating, we're judged for not being on the same level with each other.
Yeah.
And that's exactly correct.
I mean, I remember like trying to, because I'm at a point where I always ask, can I kiss you? And I've been told no, and I've been told yes, and that's been fine. But I remember like being a kid, and I've been a sensitive kid, always really nervous, especially around women. And I remember getting made fun of for like not knowing what to do, not putting my no, just put your arm around her without just do that. Like that's how you're a charismatic guy's guy, is when you can just command the situation. And it's like we're telling our 12-year-olds that, It's crazy.
Yeah, being a guy's guy, to me, is not necessarily enforcing our will upon each other.
Right. Yeah.
Right, but that in a nutshell is sometimes how boys are raised.
Yeah.
And that's a lot to do with peer pressure, and a lot to do with siblings, and a lot to do with absentee fathers.
Yeah.
You know, my dad was around a lot, but he also traveled a lot too. You know, and he worked. He was the main breadwinner of the family, and we always knew as kids that dad wasn't home because he was working. Yeah. And that was acceptable to us, and we were extremely grateful for what he provided for us. But I had a stronger relationship with my mom. And we would do like a weekly date night, just her and I. We would go out. She taught me what it was to be like a gentleman, to treat a woman great. And then what happens when I get older, into my adulthood, go through one marriage and one divorce, raising a daughter, and here we are being a really nice guy. Well, being a really nice guy doesn't help us win as an individual.
Right.
And I'm a part of a men's group, and that's what we're exploring. For me, as a recovering Mr. Nice Guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you haven't read the book No More Mr. Nice Guy.
No, but you recommend it to me.
Yeah, and I recommend it to our listeners as well, that if you're a man struggling with repeated patterns in a relationship, that's a great book to start. And what I learned when I read that book was that I was seeking other people's approval.
Yeah.
And that demasculates me. But that's my own decision.
Yeah.
From bad habits of years and years and years of built up bad habits.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, if I get her approval, I will be in the relationship that I want to be in. And then that relationship that we get into is not what we wanted in the first place.
Right.
And then we talk about power and control, which we had discussed a little bit about underneath consent, is power and control.
Yeah.
How do we communicate without bringing power and control into the forefront? Like, so that I'm not communicating to my partner, it's my way or the highway, or I'm imposing my will upon you.
Yeah.
What are some things that we can do there?
That's a tricky one. I just watched a video that like talks about like people want to possess each other. I think it's like almost like a common thing to do is like to want to be in some level of control so you can predict. But I guess responding to what you're talking about, no more Mr. Nice Guy, and I think I'm totally with you. Like that, I took on that archetype very strong. I think something that's been helpful for me is learning how to say the thing that I don't want to say. You know, that's vulnerability to me. Is like, there's something on the back of my mind that I can choose to ignore, or I can find a way to communicate that to somebody, or my partner, or my friend. And sometimes that doesn't always make me look good, or make me look like you might disapprove of me because of what I say. Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely. And to me, that's authenticity. Saying the things that you don't necessarily want to say for maybe fear of shame, or fear of being judged, and
fear of losing the relationship.
Exactly, and that is not integrity-based behavior. It's also slightly manipulative.
Yes, yeah.
And it's also going to break down the relationship more than it's going to build up. Like, you may have fear of losing the relationship if I say this. I've built it all up in my head. Like, the conversation's going to go this way and this way and this way. And I've played out the entire conversation before it even happens. And then when I go to have that conversation, it's not authentic and it's not vulnerable.
Yeah. You anticipate it. You're like playing chess right now.
With yourself.
Right?
Because the other person might be at work and they're like, I can't wait to see my boyfriend tonight. And then they get home and you're like, beginning the conversation that you played out in your head all day because you've been obsessing or anxious about this one topic that's like been nagging at you in the back of your mind.
Yeah. My ex-girlfriend, who we just ended things in August, we're in really good terms. She really taught me that. I remember, because I was an anxious mess throughout therapy at the beginning, you know, going into it, and I would walk into the room and I would know, you know, we were about to have a conversation, and I would say something 3 steps ahead, and she would just go, okay, so that was just a conversation with yourself. Do you understand that you did not, like, this is not a partnership right now?
Mm-hmm.
We're not, and that's what she'd always get me with. She always knew what to say with that. She's like, this is not a partnership. We didn't make a decision together. You made a decision and thought about it 3 steps ahead and then told me about it.
That's right.
And now I feel powerless in the relationship. And like, as like, you know, a conscious guy or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh, fuck. She feels powerless. Like I'm doing a power move right now. You know, it was like, it hit me like a truck. And she did that to me multiple times before I could start breaking that habit.
It sounds like you found yourself a partner that was very self-aware.
Yeah.
And it's never your partner's job to fix you.
Right.
However, it sounds like because you guys met, you were able to grow further as a man and as yourself.
Yeah.
As a moment of gratitude.
Yeah.
Like, we're not together anymore, but I have a lot of gratitude for the experience that we had together because I learned this and this and this.
Oh, a pivotal shift. When I first met her, I remember and she'll tell me this, when we hooked up and she was really into me and I was like, I'm a hurricane. I'm going to cause some damage. I know this about myself. And she was like, I don't care, we're going in on this. And then, my hurricane qualities came out and, don't put any responsibility on your partner, but those mirroring moments really helped me and now my next intimate relationship is going to be 50,000 times better because I met her. I mean, I still love her. Great. It was a really awesome experience.
That's good. It sounds like it. Oftentimes it takes a catalyst event like that for us to, as men, grow exponentially,
Mm-hmm.
grow vulnerably,
Yeah.
grow authentically, and with integrity with ourselves.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I've been through it as well. Not too far before you.
Mm.
So December of 2017, go through a breakup. I was blindsided because of my own behavior. It was the first time in my life that I had ever felt anxious attached.
Huh.
And
That's interesting.
we're talking about Levine's book, Attached. And I'd always been avoidant, completely avoidant, and just well, no, I won't talk about that. I'm just going to shell up. I'm going to put my walls up, and I'm not going to address that. 1, because I'm a nice guy. 2, because I'm avoidant attached. And what happens is I'm going to avoid getting too close so that when they leave me, I'm not hurt as bad.
Yeah.
Well, I met somebody that I thought I was going to spend a long time with, and I opened up, and I was too available, and I was basically too sure of myself that we were going to last forever. And I believed in that enough for the both of us. Again, that power move that you made,
Mm-hmm.
I had decided for the 2 of us.
That you guys were going to be together.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I always said it from an I statement point of view. I want this with you. I want you to be on this journey with me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't allow that to be her decision.
Yeah.
Right? So it ended, and then I found my counselors and exponentially grew because I started becoming more transparent. Basically on the path to discover what authenticity is for me, because I didn't know.
Well, I'm sure you felt authentic when you were saying that to her at the time, too.
Yeah, I would hope so. It was a catalyst event for me to realize that I was still lying to myself, that I was still trying to fool myself, that everything is okay and everything is just fine.
I think that's the tricky part, is neither of us nor people listening think we're doing these manipulative power control behaviors. It's a lack of awareness.
Hindsight is 20/20.
Hindsight is 20/20.
And thank God that we both went through something painful,
Yeah.
so that we could actually end up here,
Yeah.
or end up further down the road with your life's purpose, your mission, my own life's purpose and my mission. We wouldn't have the podcast without that catalyst event of, I thought I was being blindsided. No, I was still just lying to myself that no, this is the right thing. This is what it's going to be like. This is where I'm going to be. Well, I can't live like that anymore because it brings up so much of that anxiety.
Yeah.
And that overthinking of I'm going to have this conversation. It's going to go like this so that I get what I want.
Right.
Right? Truly manipulative.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well
I've come to grips that like now I can be grateful for that process, no matter how badly it hurt. And I would go through it 10 times again if it got me to this same place. A little bit more conscious and a little bit more self-aware.
And that's the hard part too, is knowing something is going to push you into these places of pain, and still choosing to take that risk.
Coming out of a relationship like that, we were just talking about earlier today, taking time off from an intimate relationship or a romantic relationship in between a heartache, you've got to be able to repair yourself. Or you've got to discover what the hell went wrong again and again and again.
Yeah.
Right? So taking that time off is so important so that you can rehabilitate yourself to become a better person. But if I'm jumping from one to the next to the next to the next because I'm afraid to be alone, which has never been my case, but I know that other people feel that way.
Yeah, like the serial monogamy.
Or a serial dater. Like
yeah, that's what I meant.
They're for the same purpose. Is like, well, I can't be alone, whether it's a long-term relationship or a short-term.
That was me.
Yeah.
For a very long time. Short-term.
Back to back. Short-term.
High energy, heartbreak. High energy, heartbreak.
Sure. But what I learned just the other day from the episode a couple back is that an avoidant attached personality or style will actually come on really, really strong in the beginning because they're enthusiastic and they're energetic for something new, and then they start to cool off.
Yeah.
And then they start to need more of their independence and more of their space, which is definitively me. But now that I'm aware of it, like Tommy Boy always says, like, now that you're aware of the cab air freshener, now the second step is washing it off. Dan Aykroyd says that to Tommy Boy when they're in the elevator.
It's a great quote.
It's so funny. First step, identifying it. Second step, washing it off.
Yeah.
And that's a great way to think of a relationship ending. What did I do to create this and this and this? Step 2, how can I fix that? So that it doesn't continue to happen.
And I think the challenging part in that is the feeling of space. I think when you don't know the rewards of having space between or after something, then it just feels scary and alone. And you just want something to grab onto. And that prevents that learning process, but I also totally have compassion for that, because it's hard to...
Yeah, human beings are hardwired to connect.
Hardwired to connect.
We crave it.
Yeah, hardwired to distract.
Okay. Yeah, I quit drinking 4 months ago as a personal challenge to myself, and I got really bored. And then I well, let's do a third job. Why not? I run my personal training business. I teach at Metro State, and I drive for Lyft part-time.
That's so funny.
Because I'm distracting myself.
One of our participants at the last Soul Stories met you in a Lyft car, and they told me that.
No way!
And I was
what?
Like, he drives Lyft? How does he do that? He was just telling me all these things.
Who is this person? Because I guarantee I can remember it.
Janie something. Janie...
what does she do for work?
She just moved here. She's blonde haired. You connected her. You told her to listen to Kerri-Ann's podcast. Okay. She listened to Kerri-Ann, connected to Kerri-Ann. Kerri-Ann connected her to me.
No way. Yeah. Denver really is a small town.
It's a small town.
That's funny that this one little thing that we're doing, I'm enthusiastic about my podcast. I love it. I love being on your podcast.
Yeah.
Those are the things that I'm enthusiastic about. So when I meet a stranger, I'm going to talk about those things because I only have a short amount of time to talk to them about it.
Yeah.
So what's my 30-second, what's my 2-minute story? So Janie, through Kerri-Ann, meets you as a result of just...
And now we're back here
talking about this part-time gig that, business as an entrepreneur, it's up, down, up, down, up, down. I've become so much more resilient in the last 6 years, but resiliency doesn't put money in my pocket. No matter how much I wish that it could possibly do that.
Yeah, well said.
Vulnerability doesn't put money in my pocket.
No.
But what it does is it expands my opportunity to attract what it is that I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. If I'm authentic and if I'm vulnerable with an audience of people that actually care about what I'm talking about, like in Soul Stories, then that gives me opportunity. It's still my job to capitalize on opportunity, but it doesn't always pan out the way that I want it to, and on my timeline either. Mm-hmm. So hence driving part-time for Lyft.
Yeah. and vulnerability, I think people think it's like an instant thing, and it's all of a sudden your life's better because you're vulnerable, but your life's like somewhat more challenging in some ways. And I feel like in that same sense, you still have these like downs that you're like, but wait, I go to therapy and I'm vulnerable. Like, why do I feel shitty and depressed right now? You know?
Because you're addressing the feelings that you've been numbing, whether it's distraction or through a relationship or through alcohol or through drugs, because you're finally feeling what you're meant to feel.
Yeah.
And that's why you feel down.
Yeah, because you don't want to feel that.
No, that's why I was choosing to do what I was doing. You know, like overworking, just working from sun up to sundown, so that I didn't have to feel the feels.
Yeah.
Well, as our former guest said, you gotta feel to heal.
Yeah.
And that's really good advice of like, I'm becoming more in touch with what I'm supposed to be feeling, and that in turn makes me more authentic. Then I become more vulnerable because I'm able to talk about my feelings in like an appropriate, healthy way.
Yeah. And
like you were just about to talk about is like, in some ways, vulnerability and transparency makes our lives harder.
Yeah.
Because we have an audience. And Brene Brown talks about oversharing. When we try to overshare, we're trying to build more trust with our audience, but the intent is to build more trust, and therefore it breaks down trust.
Yeah.
In the exact opposite way of what we intend.
Yeah. That's always an interesting topic. Yeah, that just hit something in me really hard, actually.
I can see that.
Yeah, I feel like I just did that, actually.
Okay. We're gonna do it because we're human, and we make mistakes. And I'm not saying that oversharing or transparency is a mistake, but I like what you said, that like we're vulnerable, and then we think that immediately our life is gonna be better.
Yeah.
In a way, reading Brene Brown's book, Daring Greatly, about vulnerability made my life instantly better because I became more conscious of oversharing.
Yeah.
And then what she teaches us is that we have to find an audience that's actually earned that vulnerability. Not everybody we meet has earned the right to see our vulnerable side.
Totally.
And that's when oversharing comes into play.
Yeah. I had a big obsession like maybe 2 years ago or a year ago with like speaking my truth, you know. And that got me into hot water because it was like, I don't need to say everything. I don't need to say everything on my mind at this moment. And I said some hurtful things to people because I was like, what? That's true for me, without really thinking about how it would impact people.
Yeah. We still have to be a nice person.
Right.
Although we're transparent and vulnerable and authentic. That authenticity piece is the search and that journey that I've been trying to work my way through.
Yeah.
What is true authenticity? And there are like 5 or 6 or 10 moments of clarity on authenticity in the last 8 months of recording the podcast. And without the catalyst event that happened December 2017, without meeting certain individuals in the spring of 2018 that I liked, that just weren't the right fit for me, it still taught me something. And then it was all of a sudden just this moment of like, not inspiration, but more of like commitment. I'm committed to building a community of authentic people so that I have better people to be around, so that in turn I can be a better person, so that in turn it's a compound effect.
Yeah.
We're building each other up, one podcast episode at a time, or one Lyft rider at a time.
One Lyft connection.
That would be so funny to like show up at your event and be reintroduced to Janie.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden just be like, well, it's fewer than 6 degrees of separation here in Denver.
Right.
It's a small town.
And one of those degrees of separation's in Brazil.
Yeah, right, right. And this is a good example of how social media can be used for good. Kerri-Ann and I met on Facebook. There's no other way that I would have been connected with her had I not been intentionally seeking out better people to connect with on Facebook.
Yeah.
And she's a friend of a friend, and etc. And now here we are sitting on the couch joking about a Lyft ride that I gave.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, probably 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. And this is in person, which is like social media leads to in person if you allow it.
Yeah. If that's your openness to opportunity, for sure. Well, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, Danny, what's the best way to do that?
At Soul Stories Denver on Instagram, facebook.com/soulsandstories, soulstoriesdenver.com, Danny at soulstoriesdenver.com. If you type in Soul Stories Denver on Google, Denver specifically, that's the best way to find it.
Okay. Search Soul Stories Denver. That's the
Yes.
best way. And then on all social media platforms.
All social, except Twitter. I don't understand Twitter.
Twitter's interesting.
Yeah.
Twitter is interesting for sure. It's better now that they expanded it by twice as many characters, but still.
Wow.
How am I supposed to get my point across in a 280 characters or less?
Donald Trump does it, so.
Well, Donald's... all right, now we're going to go down a different rabbit hole. I was going to give you another 5 minutes of an opportunity to talk about something of your choice. No, of course, if you wanted to leave us with one message that we either touched on and didn't expand on, or something brand new that you want to leave with us today, what would it be?
I would say, step one, learn what it is to share that uncomfortable truth, and do that over and over again until you learn that these are all projections within inside you. And once you learn about your projections and your feelings, and that those are not other people's responsibility, go deep down the personal responsibility path, which is where I am currently stepping on and off every day, trying to stay on, not always staying on. But yeah, that's what I think I would give advice to people for.
Okay. And along that path, along that journey, how do you deal with shame and discomfort and personal judgment, like self-judgment?
Allow it, I would say. I'd say it's gonna come. It comes back. I had a real rough weekend with shame this past weekend, and I think the best thing that I was I had a really rough moment with my anxiety and my depression's flaring up, and I was feeling really numb, and I was talking to my best friend, and I was like, I just feel so numb. I don't care about anything. And she's like, well, yeah, because you take care of traumatized kids for your day job and you do soul stories at night. You only have so much in the tank. And last weekend was one of the first times I just allowed myself to be numb instead of really finding ways to go down the self-destructive pathway, and that was really nice.
Got it.
Yeah.
You allowed yourself to feel what you were meant to feel.
Yeah, which is really hard, and I think shame really spirals for me, at least, when I'm like, well, I'm not being who I want to be. I'm not caretaking. I'm not in charge. I'm not the leader I want to be. Like, you piece of shit, Danny. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And just like a machine gun. And off and on that happens, and when I'm able to be aware of it, it's really nice to let go of it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Shame is a destructive emotion.
Yeah.
Big difference between guilt and shame, but I think we could do a whole nother episode of podcast on just shame alone.
Yeah. Whew. Yeah. Deep topic.
Yeah, it's absolutely an opportunity for us to tune into who we are and why we hold on to that shame, and why it doesn't pass as well. Because it's going to come, but why isn't it passing?
Yeah. What do you think that is?
Well, I think that it's an overanalysis. Our mind just starts to spin because it's triggered by something that makes us feel ashamed. We're worried that we're going to continue to do the behavior that caused the shame. And also, we don't have the skills and the solutions in order to deal with it. So, learning skills from a professional is probably the best way.
Getting that third party.
Absolutely. Outside eyes on our blind spots. And then they get to ask the professional appropriate questions in a comfortable, trusting environment.
Yeah.
And then also reminding ourselves that we have hope and that we can have faith that it won't last.
And that we can get past it.
Yeah, that it's momentary and that it will come and go. Most certainly will go.
Do you ever have people talk to you about friends as therapists? Was that brought up to you?
Oh, like friends being a support system that they can turn to like a therapist?
Yeah.
Yes, of course, like nature is my church.
Yes.
Right? Nature is not a church, but you can become in tune spiritually with yourself in a place like nature. Like
I think I would have many friends that would argue you right now, yeah.
Right? But friends are not therapists.
Yeah.
Friends are like the time when you need to just like vent, and they're going to listen half of the time. Maybe they're going to just basically let you do that. But is emotionally dumping on your friends consistently like you can with a therapist appropriate? Maybe not. Maybe we're coming back to the oversharing. Maybe we're coming back to they're not an empath, so they can't know how to deal.
Yeah.
Like it sounds like you're really empathic about other people's emotions and bearing the weight of their emotions with them.
Right.
And you're capable of doing that, but you still need to regenerate, rejuvenate, recover, and reset yourself in order to do it again the next week professionally.
Yeah.
I'm an empath to not nearly the strength or degree that you are. And I need a recharge day every single Sunday. But I'm also not in a space of where I'm like bearing the emotional weight of other people.
Right. And I can bear the emotional weight of my kids that I work with and when I'm in the soul story space. But when I'm hanging out with friends, I'm not going to do that. Like I'll listen for a little bit.
Sure.
I can't transform anyone like a therapist can.
You setting healthy boundaries in that situation is good so that you can continue to make great change in the world.
I agree. I've had several people be like, I don't need therapy. I just have friends that I talk to.
Did your friends go to school for counseling?
Right.
Did your friends get a doctorate in X, Y, and Z or a master's in this? That's why we seek out experts in the Denver community and beyond.
Yeah.
Is because I don't have a master's, but I do have a passion for helping people develop self-awareness or discover self-awareness and personal discovery through the Enneagram. That's my passion. I'm trained in order to do that. But a lot of that comes from my own personal experiences and my own personal growth from the tool. But like I said earlier, it's a skill that I've learned and developed. It's a tool that we put in our toolbox, our tool belt, that we bring out when we need it. But I'm certainly not a therapist.
Right. And when you're creating that space for the Enneagram, that's your space to be within the Enneagram.
That's exactly correct.
Creating those boundaries that you're talking about.
Yep. And through the Enneagrams actually has shown me that vulnerability is a strength and not a weakness for my particular personality type. And that's how I'm able to eliminate the Mack truck full of marshmallows.
Nice. Where'd you get that metaphor?
Brenda Abdullah she's a management coach here in town. She's one of my Enneagram mentors. I've attended her workshop 3 times.
Yeah.
And each and every time I'm a different person. And a year ago or so was the glaring moment of like, I'm not authentic with myself right now, because the 6 months before or the year before I went to the workshop and I was being authentic, and then all of a sudden just 2 breakups, and then this and this and this and this business and that, blah, 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 blah. And then I go to the workshop a year later, I identified the differences in myself within a year's time, and I was not okay with that. And I decided, because of Brenda's expertise, I said, I can make a change from here on out. 4 months later, we have a podcast. Within that time, I wrote my first book. And then I'm finding more authentic relationships with men and women since that time.
That's awesome. It's crazy how you can see so much change. Like in 4 months, you're like, I have a podcast and I wrote a book.
Yep.
4 months, that's like such a short period of time.
Yeah. Thankfully, I finished the book first, and then I met somebody, and I'm like, I'm ready to date. And then she said she was ready to date, and then all of a sudden she got scared, and then she ran, and then I started the podcast. Because I'm like, that wasn't authentic.
Let's thank her for the podcast.
Yeah, she was another catalyst event. And it took me a long time to get over that. Actually, from April and May of 2018 till September, basically. You know? Like, that one almost messed me up more than the catalyst, except it didn't. Because the catalyst...
I like that phrasing.
The catalyst event produced the book because I was journaling and I just needed to get it out.
Yeah.
Get out my life. Okay, this 20-year span of my life was holding me back in relationships. And I needed to discover that.
Did the book help you work through that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I shared it with my counselor and my therapist, and she's like, Dave, this is appropriate sharing of your life over 20 years.
What parts of that would have made it inappropriate, do you think?
So the context of the book is how anxiety and depression fueled a quest for legacy in fitness and nutrition.
Okay.
So if I'm talking about 3 cases of a sexual assault in my life, there's some inappropriate sharing that could happen in a book.
Yeah.
With an audience that doesn't know me well. So a book that really kind of set the tone for me sharing in my book was The Mask of Masculinity by Lewis Howes.
Okay.
And he talks about sexual assault that occurred to him, and he did it in an appropriate way. I'm like, okay, that's a foundation and that's a boundary at which I can live in.
Like a way, I imagine, an intention to teach versus an intention to just like for the audience to bear the weight of it.
Right, exactly. Not from a victim standpoint, but from a motivation and like an inspiration of like, in spite of whatever's happened in your life, things can change, things can get better. You can have hope and faith in order to grow and actually achieve what it is that you want and not be held back by trauma.
Yeah.
And in just sharing minimal details, you can still get that point across.
Yeah.
And that's something that I tried to do.
That's really interesting. Something that I've learned in the Soul Stories journey that I've been saying is when I'm coaching people to share vulnerable stories for the community, I try to always say the story's not for you, the story's for the audience. Like, and to reframe that, like what you're doing is you're providing a teaching moment. You're showing yourself so other people can grow. And I think a challenge in storytelling can be people telling stories to reaffirm those stories and hold on to those stories.
Right.
And not let go of them or give them away.
Yeah. There was definitely a story within the book that the catalyst event had actually brought up repressed memories for me from 10 years previously.
That you had no awareness of.
No awareness from that time.
Wow.
And then the catalyst event happened, and I'm in a room full of trauma educators, basically, of a community of body workers and therapists and things like that were meant to gather together to impact change of survivors. That was their whole purpose. And I'm sitting in the room and I'm having flashbacks of repressed memories from 10 years previously. So all of a sudden, now I had to deal with a breakup, memories I did remember, and new memories that had resurfaced after 10 years.
And how does the book relate to that?
Because I tell the story of the 10 years previously, that instance, in order to let it go.
Oh, yeah.
Then my journaling that ended up being the book was me letting go of that past trauma.
Yeah.
That I had held on to, like you were saying, as a habit or as like a crutch or as a numbing or as a distraction.
Yeah.
So that I didn't have to I didn't have to get close to a woman ever again.
Oh man, I remember a conversation where about, dating, and they're like, why do you do that? I'm like, well, my mom, like my relationship to my mom, and I would always say that. I'd always come back to these stories. And then as I did the therapy and like let go of some of these beliefs, I just noticed this the other day. I was like, oh, I don't say that anymore, you know? And I used to say it all the time. And it wasn't even like a conscious like shift. It was just like, I didn't need it anymore.
Because you worked through it in an appropriate way.
Yeah.
And not with friends.
And not with friends, although I tried very hard, many different times.
Well, I think that that's a great place to wrap it up. If Danny's message resonates with you guys, please don't hesitate to reach out to him at Danny@soulstoriesdenver.com.
Yes.
Nailed it.
Nailed it.
Thanks
Thanks,
again.
Dave.
I appreciate you as always, man.
Appreciate it.